One day, engineers opened the dam's pipes and released water into a place where it had not been for millions of years. The flow, at a furious speed, rushed straight into the Grand Canyon, into a dry riverbed that nature itself had carved over millions of years and then long ago buried under layers of sand and stone. Water surged with a power of 264,000 gallons per second, lifting sand, rocks, and silt that had not moved for decades. The cliffs hummed. The river level rose by almost 5 meters, and no one knew whether the canyon would withstand that pressure. Until that moment, there had been only heat, stone, and dust here, but now the largest artificial flood in the history of the United States had begun. And this was only the first release. Then they repeated it again and again, and each time millions of tons of water crashed into the canyon. Its volume would be enough to fill the Empire State Building in less than 20 minutes. The consequences of this process cannot be reversed, but another release is already on the way. And a logical question arises: why flood the canyon at all? Who decided this was a good idea? It is time to understand the story of the Great Flow. And before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and also leave a like. These 2 easy actions will really help me promote the videos. In return, I will be glad to delight you with new and interesting videos. Enjoy watching. In the morning at 6 o'clock, 20 minutes on the 26th of March, 1996, engineers opened the first of 4 giant pipes of the Glen Canyon Dam. These pipes are called jet tubes. In essence, these are huge metal channels that allow water to exit the reservoir directly, bypassing the turbines. Over the next 9 hours, the other 3 tunnels were opened, and then all 8 turbines of the hydroelectric power plant were switched on. The water flow grew to 335,000 gallons per second. That is about half, again as much as the maximum volume that usually passes through the turbines alone. Put simply, every 2 seconds, so much water passed through the dam that it would be enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool. As the flow intensified, the river level rose almost 5 meters above normal. In just 1 week, 238 billion gallons of water swept through the canyon. Nothing like this had ever been done before. It was the first deliberate flood in history. But before talking about the consequences, we need to understand why it was necessary to stage something like this at all. We are talking about the Colorado River. It flows through 7 US states and 2 Mexican states. But, to be honest, it has not reached the sea for a very long time. This has become a real symbol of the water crisis of the entire American Southwest. Once, the Colorado was a mighty river. Its waters began their journey in the Rocky Mountains, passed through the Grand Canyon, and reached the Gulf of California in Mexico. Today, only a thin trickle remains of its former power, a barely living river that is physically unable to make it to the ocean. From the river's point of view, a total failure. When researchers went to Mexico to see the lower course of the Colorado, they did not find a river. In front of them, there was only mud, sand, and dust. Where water used to roar, a dry riverbed now lies. The river that for millions of years connected the Rocky Mountains with the Gulf last reached its delta on its own almost 30 years ago. After the completion of the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam in 1966, the Colorado practically stopped reaching the sea. Sometimes it happened, but extremely rarely. The Colorado is considered one of the most managed rivers on the planet. On its main channel, there are 15 dams, and on the tributaries, hundreds of others. It is an entire system of dams, pumping stations, and reservoirs controlling practically every kilometer of the flow. But the key moment in the river's fate came in 1963, when the federal agency, the Bureau of Reclamation, completed the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam. It is located in northern Arizona, only 15 miles upstream from Grand Canyon National Park. The dam blocked about 186 miles of the river channel and formed Lake Powell, the second largest reservoir in the country. Imagine a wall more than 200 meters high and almost 500 meters wide. When this wall rose, the entire section of the river, 264 miles long, from the dam to Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, changed forever. Just 10 years later, scientists noticed the first signs of trouble. Sandbars and beaches along the Colorado began to disappear. After that, only worse. In the Grand Canyon, especially in its upper part known as Marble Canyon, everything changed beyond recognition. Before the dam was built, millions of tons of fine sand and silt were brought here every year from the Colorado Basin. Now this sediment no longer passes downstream. It gets stuck behind the dam. As a result, sandbars and beaches began to shrink, both in size and in number. What used to be restored every spring during floods disappeared forever. Rafting guides who had taken groups down the river for decades watched as the beaches literally vanished before their eyes, and where the water receded, vegetation began to grow actively. The local willow, coyote willow, together with aggressive invasive species like tamarisk, camelthorn, and Bermuda grass, quickly captured the newly exposed spaces. Mesquite trees that used to grow right by the water began to die. The river moved too far away. In the end, after the dam was built, the volume of sand reaching the Grand Canyon decreased by more than 90%. Before, the Colorado lived by its own laws. Powerful summer floods reshaped its channel every year, washed away the excess, piled up the new, and literally formed the canyon layer by layer. Today, that rhythm is gone. The flow is controlled by people and by city electricity consumption schedules. The water level still rises and falls, but now this happens gently, evenly, and predictably, without the destructive and at the same time creative floods that for centuries shaped the canyon's landscape. As a result, exotic plants continue to spread, sandbars disappear, and piles of rocks gradually take over the main river channel. Scientists looked at all this and understood. Doing nothing anymore is impossible. We have to intervene. The solution suggested itself: to return power to the water, to release more water into the river. In 1996, a decision was made to conduct a series of experiments to find out whether it was possible to restore the disappearing sandbars. Thus began the so-called controlled releases of water. The essence was simple. Engineers deliberately opened the turbines and additional channels, allowing water to bypass the energy system and rush directly into the riverbed. These releases even got their own name: experimental floods. In essence, these were artificial floods designed to imitate the natural spring overflows that disappeared after the dam was built. Usually, such releases were about half the volume of a real natural flood and lasted from 3 to 8 days. But even that was enough for 2 to 3 times more water than usual to pass through the dam in a short period. By the time of the first experiment, the river had already changed greatly. Some rapids turned into debris jams, places where large debris and rocks brought by side canyons accumulated and blocked the flow. Water struggled to push forward because the river no longer had the strength to clean its own channel. So what did the first release look like? The experiment proved sandbars really can be restored, but not for long. In the first days of the artificial flood, sand began to settle and form new beaches. Scientists were thrilled. It seemed the solution had been found. But a few months later, when the dam returned to its normal operating mode, most of those deposits were carried downstream. Nevertheless, the main discovery of that year turned out to be much more important. It became clear that the sand entering the Colorado from tributaries stays in the channel only for a short time. This meant one thing: if an artificial flood is launched too late, when the sand has already settled or been carried away, the effect will be minimal. Floods must be carried out strictly after natural rises in water, when tributaries bring fresh masses of sand. Overall, the flood of 1996 lasted longer than planned. At first, everything went perfectly. The water brought new deposits and fresh sandbars formed on the banks and in the channel, but then most of this material again went downstream, and yet the effect was noticeable. Part of the sand settled above the usual water level, and it was there that small backwaters formed, ideal places for fish spawning. The 2 largest rapids on the river became wider. Archaeological sites along the banks were not damaged. Even the plants that tried to capture the former beaches remained unharmed. As a result, the researchers acknowledged, the ecological benefit of the experiment significantly exceeded the possible harm. But it is worth admitting, not all consequences of blocking the Colorado turned out to be negative. For example, trout, which never liked the warm and muddy water of the free-flowing river, suddenly began to feel great in the cold and clear water below the dam. The conditions turned out to be so comfortable that its numbers increased sharply. A stable water level also helped riparian vegetation. Trees and shrubs that used to suffer from sharp fluctuations began to grow, forming a dense green wall. This attracted rare birds, and other animals followed them. Along the river, a real green ribbon of life formed. Even tourists began to get more pleasure from rafting through the canyon. The changes looked so impressive that the warning signals went unnoticed for a long time. Only in 1983 did scientists truly realize how important regular floods were. It was they that shaped the canyon's landscape and supported life in its channel. That is why it took people so long to begin acting. In June of that year, something unexpected happened. Due to rapid snowmelt in the mountains, the level of Lake Powell rose sharply, and engineers had to urgently release water from the Glen Canyon Dam. The flow reached 726,000 gallons per second. This was less than during the most powerful natural floods, but still colossal. For the first time, it was necessary to use special spillways, gigantic tunnels cut directly into the rock next to the dam. At first, the operators simply watched the process, but soon they raised the alarm. The water suddenly turned red. The scene looked almost biblical. The reason turned out to be frightening. The rushing flow was tearing off concrete and ripping pieces of sandstone from the tunnel walls. At some point, they seriously feared that the tunnels could collapse and damage the dam itself. Fortunately, catastrophe was avoided. The flows were stopped, and later the engineers completely redesigned the spillway construction. The cause of the destruction was cavitation, a phenomenon in which tiny bubbles form in rapidly moving water. They collapse with such force that they literally tear pieces of rock and concrete from the tunnel walls. After modernization, the risk was reduced. But the most interesting part began afterward, when the water went downstream. Scientists and local guides who knew the river like the back of their hand were stunned. Many areas that for years had been dry, scorched beaches turned out to be covered with a fresh layer of sand. The flood washed away part of the invasive vegetation that had seized the banks and partially restored habitat for river animals. This effect could not be ignored. It became clear, under certain conditions, floods really are able to return the river's lost shape and power. After what they saw, scientists and river management specialists decided to try to repeat the success. Thus, new controlled floods appeared. The first of them took place in 2004, then in 2008, and this time the timing was chosen perfectly. Seasonal rains brought huge volumes of sand into the Colorado from tributaries. It was impossible to miss such a chance. During these artificial floods, the concentration of sand in the water rose sharply. The flow became muddy, whirlpools formed in the channel, and new sandbars began to take shape, the very ones that disappeared after the dam was built. In 2004, the water release from the Glen Canyon Dam reached 254,000 gallons per second. This flow rushed through the canyon for a little less than a week. Engineers managed to avoid the problems they faced in '96, but there still was not enough sand for full restoration of the beaches. The experiment of 2008 was even larger. Almost 290,000 gallons of water per second surged down the canyon. The flood lasted about 60 hours, and again the river seemed to come alive, reminding everyone what it was like before the dams appeared. It was precisely thanks to these experiments that scientists and engineers developed a new permanent strategy for water releases. Now, artificial floods are no longer planned in advance by the calendar. They happen when enough sand accumulates in the river. Put simply, the flood begins when nature gives the signal. The main attention is given to Marble Canyon, a section about 60 miles long immediately below the confluence with the Paria River. It is the Paria that brings most of the sand, and the entire process depends on it. As has already become clear, the key factor here is exact timing. Start too early, there will not be enough sand. Be late, and the flow will simply carry everything downstream. To catch the ideal moment, scientists installed remotely controlled cameras that show how long the restored sandbars last and in which months the effect is most pronounced. Calculations are carried out with high accuracy. Specialists compare the volumes of sand coming from tributaries and the amount that the river carries farther. The difference between these indicators points to the right moment for releasing water. Then the flow lifts sand from the bottom and evenly distributes it along the banks. Everyone is happy. The beaches return, and they are vital. In 2006, the National Park Service was forced to limit the number of rafting routes. The reason is simple. There were catastrophically few beaches along the river, and without them, tourists have nowhere to set up camps and simply nowhere to be safely. Later, the situation improved a little. Periodic water releases from the Glen Canyon Dam helped partially restore the sandbars, but the effect turned out to be temporary. Beaches appeared, and then disappeared again. Interestingly, the very idea of controlled releases was first voiced back in 1991, quietly, almost in a whisper. But by 1993, these conversations had turned into loud demands. River guides were especially active. It became more and more difficult for them to find places to spend the night. Despite the fact that millions of tons of sand annually entered the Colorado from two main tributaries below the dam, this sand simply was not being used. And yet, the role of sandbars is much more important than it seems. At the moment, the only real steps that can stop the catastrophe are saving water, redistributing it, and adopting new laws. The main question is different. Are people ready to change their habits for the sake of the future? And that's all for now. I advise you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because in the future, many interesting videos await you. See you again soon.